Hey guys, I've got Tom McClure here, and we are going to be doing a video on vegan or plant-based macronutrients, calories, how to track some, some kind of problem-solving tips and tricks to make sure that you are on point with your calories and macros if you're following a plant-based diet. So first things first is setting your plan up. Okay, so we've got our nutrition template here, and what we advise is when you're setting your plan up is to follow the advice of just dropping your protein percentage overall, and then adjusting your carbohydrates, fats accordingly. So if we're setting things up, we would just drop it down to 20%. Now, the reason for this is because it's really challenging to hit a higher protein target without overshooting carbohydrates and fats. And at 20%, you're going to be still eating adequate protein to be able to support overall health, performance, recovery, muscle building, fat loss. So this isn't going to be like something that's super low, like 60 grams a day, but it's also going to allow you to have a better balance of macronutrients across the day. And Tom, that's kind of really a key thing, isn't it? Like, especially when we're talking about, setting overall targets, is having that achievable targets to follow.
Yeah, 100%. If you're plant-based, vegan, vegetarian, yeah, it's a common thing we hear is that I don't eat enough protein, I can't get enough protein, particularly if they're maybe coming from a more meat-dominant diet, where you say it's very easy to have one ingredient foods that give you a high serving of protein at every meal. High protein snacks can be a little bit easier if you're eating off an animal-based diet. So I'd say just lowering that goal. Like I say, you're still going to get enough, you're still going to get plenty. We can then focus on how we just distribute it across the day a little bit as well. So you just have to maybe be a little bit more dialed in that. But yeah, lowering that expectation and goal is definitely the first port of call.
Definitely. And as if you see here, I've just adjusted these. So the weight is 75 kilos, for example. The protein target at 20% is still going to, at a lean gains and a maintenance, is still going to be roughly, above 1.6, 1.5, 1.6, 1.8, maybe even. And this is more than adequate. These are ideal targets. Okay. So again, if you wanted to drop slightly lower, even, to 18%, that's a real kind of bottom amount if you're really struggling. But if you can kind of have a daily target of that, you're going to be there or thereabouts. Now, the next point that we want to focus on is when you're tracking calories from following a plant-based diet, is to focus on calories and protein primarily. Okay. When you're getting into carbs and fats, it becomes very challenging, as if you are plant-based and tracked the calories and macros before, it's really hard because there's very few single protein sources. Okay, they come along with carbs or they come along with fats, and adjusting these is challenging. So if you can just focus on hitting your calories and hitting your protein, then carbs and carbohydrates and fats can kind of be adjusted, based on personal preferences, on your food choices. And this allows you to kind of still make progress. So when you're focusing on, daily targets, don't get too hung up on carbohydrates and fats. Now, Tom, you talked about kind of distribution over the day. Now, one of the reasons that we use our meal system of training meal and anytime meals is to give you targets, is to give you breakdowns to kind of follow and structure your nutrition. If you're following a plant-based diet, like, have you got some tips in terms of what people should be focusing on rather than maybe getting a little bit overwhelmed with all of these numbers?
I would always look at it as a range. And I think if you've got those 2 meal targets there, you'll notice that there's a range of kind of 560 to 600. So it's a kind of 40 calorie difference in range. So actually, that's not a lot. You might over portion, under portion. We know meal labels aren't 100% accurate. And again, with the protein target there, we've got a range of like 28 to 30 grams. So they're the 2 things I think you've got to look at. They're the biggest metrics that are going to move the needle in terms of if you're trying to get a little bit leaner, or maybe you're trying to increase your performance. So I think that would always be a starting point, is just, how close are you to that overall calorie target? And then do you maybe need to bump protein up or reduce it down to hit your target there?
Yeah, exactly that. So, you know, the reason why we give you this is to try to distribute your calories and your protein. And again, the same principle applies as to daily targets, is to try and make sure that you're getting relatively close to this calorie target primarily. Okay. Don't worry that you're getting 18 grams of fats or 83 grams of carbs. Like it's really challenging to do. You know, some meals you might be able to do it, but doing it consistently is really hard. Now, we spoke about protein being the next thing that you want to kind of focus on. Now, if you're really struggling to hit this amount, okay, then all you would need to do is maybe top things up in terms of having a protein powder, you know, or something, you know, like that, a higher protein yogurt. Alpro do a really good zero sugars one, which is primarily protein. So you can kind of top things up with this. And again, we don't necessarily need to do this every single day. Some people don't like taking protein powder every day, but it might be something that you can kind of just bump up. So you could add in 25 grams. And what that will do is bring your protein target down to make it a little bit more achievable. Okay. That could, again, be yogurt. It could be protein powder. You know, these kind of like higher protein foods. I mean, there are some, you know, slightly kind of vegan substitutes now, some meats and stuff like this that are a little bit more higher protein, but they often come with fat. So we find that probably these two things, you know, the yogurt and the protein powder, are probably the easiest ways to kind of get this in and make additions. So as you see here, you can make some adjustments and bring this down to make it a little bit more achievable. Okay. So these are kind of key points: calories overall, protein overall, and then carbohydrates and fats can slightly be adjusted. Like Tom, you know, for you that are following a plant-based diet, often the case is that what we advise people to do is try to get a protein source from a plant-based diet and then a protein and carb source in their meal, isn't it? You know, so that protein and carb or a protein and fat source. So you basically have, instead of, you know, if you're following a meat or a fish-based diet, you would have protein, carbs, fats. Whereas now we want a protein source and then a protein, a carb, or a protein and fat source. And that allows you to potentially try to kind of follow that slightly, you know, training meal, anytime meal structure, correct?
Yeah, particularly I think protein-rich carbs are a really great way to bump that number up if you're a little bit under. Like say if your protein-dense source is maybe something like tofu, maybe like tempeh, or maybe even a meat replacement, but then using a protein-rich carb, you know, things like chickpeas, things like lentil pasta, black beans, etc. Things that you can very easily add into a meal, a one-pot meal, those kind of things can help bump those numbers up. It may be that a different kind of meal, like say we might look for more protein-rich fats, things that can help bump that number up. So things like chia seeds, flax seeds, nuts and seeds. But also, I think commonly what I see is people get focused on everything's got to be on one plate.
Yeah.
Rather than like say think about having something separately. So topping a meal with some high protein yogurt on the side. Like say having a half serving of protein powder, you know, on the side of your plate. It hasn't all got to be on one plate in front of you. Let's say if you're a little bit under with something, same with something like carbs, an extra piece of fruit helps you hit your carb target.
Mate, that's fantastic advice. You know, really simple, like building that meal to make it. And I think a lot of people that are tracking calories and macros can get a little bit hung up on recipes and, you know, just following a specific recipe, whereas actually most of the time you just need to build meals. You know, you understand macronutrients, you understand the kind of, you know, the nutrients that are involved in different foods, and then you can build them. And sometimes, you know, like I say, that might be adding things on to a meal, like you say, to be able to try and make up your numbers. If you see here, we've got our meal planner. So Tom spoke about there, like certain things, chia seeds and certain protein-rich carbs and certain protein-rich fats. And again, you can make this up. So you potentially could use maybe a higher protein and fat, such as a tofu in the morning, or you could use a higher protein and carb in the morning, such as chickpeas. You can use oats, again, so which might be then a little bit more protein and carbs. So you're using a protein powder, or you're using a higher protein yogurt, and you're adding the carbs in. Again, if you want a little bit more fats in that, you can add a little bit more peanut butter, which will be protein and fat. So it really is about understanding what you require and using these kind of staple foods that maybe don't, that allow you to kind of hit your targets. Our recipes here, like you said, we have a variety, and Tom spoke about the pasta, the protein pastas. I think these, for me, are some of the best things that plant-based clients can use to be able to make sure that they're hitting their protein targets. And these often fit really well with like our meal system. So often like a chickpea will be like basically like a 1-to-2 or a 1-to-3 protein to carb ratio. So you basically need a serving to hit 20 grams of protein and 45, 50 grams of carbs. And then you add a little bit of fats in there from a pesto or a sauce, and maybe add some nutritional yeast. That's what I do, just bump up my protein again. And you've got a meal with a load of veg. So I think definitely I would be checking those out because they're very macro friendly. I think that it's super easy to be able to use. I mean, I use the Yugo Thrive ones, the fresh ones, but you've got lentil, pea, chickpea, black bean noodles and all of these types of things. So it's just finding a way to kind of do that. On our recipe list, we have some of these already mapped out. Spicy tomato pasta, edamame stir fry, so these types of things are really, really simple. And again, it's slightly more whole food based than always using a tempeh or a tofu or a meat replacement. Definitely ones to check out there. Tom, thanks so much. I think that was hopefully really kind of helpful for people in terms of giving them a few kind of tips and tricks and stuff like that. So just a little recap, make sure that you kind of make your overall targets achievable, but don't just be, going 30% protein because that's what you've heard or read on Instagram or research study, 20%, and then make it a personalized to you. Like you look at these targets and see if they're applicable. The reason why we suggest that is because we know it's going to provide you with adequate protein, and then focus on calories and protein overall, and then calories and protein in your meals. Maybe make a small adjustment if you need to bump this up. And again, this doesn't necessarily need to be every day, depending on the food choices. And then maybe look at some really kind of nice options, like Tom said, about protein-rich carbs, protein-rich fats, and then easy wins, such as using the protein pastas. Tom, anything you want to wrap up on?
No, like we say to all our clients, start small, get a couple of go-to meals in place, and then make adjustments from there. Don't try and do everything all at once. Now those basics, and then layer it up from there.
Yeah, fantastic stuff. Hopefully some useful tips. As always, guys, any questions, let us know. But hopefully that's been helpful, and we'll talk soon.